Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for joining us for this special broadcast on Afghanistan with esteemed journalist brother Ashraf Yusufzai. I'm your host, Ebrahim Deen, researcher at the Afghan Middle East Center. And this week we're covering a very topical issue of Afghanistan and the recent gains by the Taliban. To do this, we have esteemed journalist brother Ashraf Yusufzai. He was previously involved in mediation efforts through the Swiss Institute for Peace, but also the European Institute for Peace. He worked for the International Committee for the Red Cross between 2011 and 2014. He has been a regular contributor to various news outlets, including the Voice of America, the News International, and is now a contributor to a freelance contributor to the Sunday News and Arab News Pakistan. Assalamu alaikum and jazakallah for being with us, brother Ashraf.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you, brother Ebrahim Deen, for such a lovely introduction. Thanks a lot.
No, just reading the bio, I feel we're going to learn hopefully a lot from this interview. So, Brother Ashraf, you've been focusing on Afghanistan for decades now, basically. What do you see as the current situation? We're just looking at the news and seeing Taliban gains. What's behind these gains? What do we see at the moment actually happening on the ground?
Yes, alhamdulillah. If I say that I've been following Afghanistan since my childhood, I would not be wrong, because I was born in a journalist family. So I've seen a lot of this. I have seen a lot of the war from very close range across the border. Now I believe that the war again has entered into a phase where everything is happening so quickly, so rapidly, that you as a journalist are not able to follow up with it. If I say this is because since yesterday, in the past 24 hours, the Taliban have captured at least 8 provincial capitals. And this is happening all because of one true fact that the Taliban had mentioned repeatedly. We want to talk, we want to have peace process, otherwise we are capable of capturing the whole country within 2 months. I don't know, many people did not took them serious. They said this at the time of Doha peace process, they said them afterwards, but no one listened to them. And they were aware that once the Americans left, once all the European powers with the air power leave Afghanistan, they would be able to conquer many areas, because they were already present across the country. They were present in almost every province. So as soon as the foreign troops left Afghanistan, as soon as the military attacks or military supremacy in the air finished or ended, they started taking areas. And one of the fact with that is the Afghan Taliban are this time able to convince their opponents, that is the Afghan army people. They use a tactic. They send out the elders, the spingiri or the white-bearded, the gray-bearded people before attacking a place. They tell them that we don't want to fight, we don't want to kill you, and don't want to get killed in response. So it's better that we talk it out and you guys leave it to us. And it has happened on many occasions that the elders are heard, and that the Taliban are able to capture large areas, not just small towns or districts, but large areas peacefully without even firing a single bullet. Because the Afghan army just surrenders, they are pardoned, they are given certificates of safety, and they can carry out the certificates and show around to all the Taliban. No one then bothers disturbing them. That is one of the reasons they are going so strong.
Yeah, because we're looking at the gains. The gains are hundreds of kilometers in days, and it definitely points to negotiations, but also widespread desertions within the Afghan army itself. The question is, why do you think why do you think they started the offensive now? The US pullout was supposed to be end of August, so why did they start it 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the official pullout? And two is, what's your thoughts on the fact that they first have consolidated control on the north, rather than in the southern strongholds of Kandahar, and that which just got kept consolidated today, basically.
Yes, brother, one thing is important. Everybody, including many of us here, even in Pakistan, who are not very familiar with the Taliban, they believed and they were made to believe by media that the Taliban are only an ethnic Pashtun majority group of militants, or whatever they named them, and that no one else is supporting them. That particularly meant that the Taliban would be effective only in the south of Afghanistan, where Pashtuns are in dominance, where they are in majority. The fact, however, is different. The Taliban were able in the past 20 years to recruit many amongst the Hazara, the Uzbek, and the Tajik communities that they didn't had control over in the past. In fact, 23 members of the Shura include two non-ethnic Pashtuns. There's one of the senior most Taliban figures, who is an ethnic Tajik, another one is Uzbek, and they are part of the Taliban Rahbari Shura. So it means that they are not Pashtuns only. Why are they effective in the north? That is, these 9 provinces that they took over in the past 6 days. The reason is because so many Tajiks and Uzbeks are fighting among the Taliban ranks. They have joined the Taliban. And they are not just Pashtuns now, so they are easily accepted by the Taliban, by the locals or the militias who are there. They are, from the same ethnicity, from the same language and ethnicity, and they accept each other easily. If were only Pashtuns, then they would have probably faced issues. We have seen in places like Jozjan and in other areas where they are staunch enemies. They are, like the Dostum militia, even they have joined the Taliban ranks after surrendering. So it means that they, yes.
No, it's interesting you brought up the Dostum militia. What do you see as happening now that Ashraf Ghani, previously trying to evade and trying to undermine, the different ethnic groups and the previous warlords, is now actually calling them. I mean, he had a meeting yesterday to try and actually get these militia groupings on his side. Do you see him as being too late now for, actually trying to incorporate all these different ethnic groupings at the expense of the Afghan army?
Yes, brother. This also, gives us a reply to our previous question that I missed. The Afghan army, it's mostly composed of people from all ethnicities, not just the Pashtuns or the Tajiks. Everybody is in there. Although the figures were exaggerated, they were, believed to be 300,000 plus, but they were, in reality less than 180,000. These people gathered with the militias now, different militias across the country. They have realized one thing, if not many, they have realized one thing, that over the past many years, the politicians have been improving their standard of life and their bank balances, but they were not caring about the Afghan nation. And it's a general belief in Afghanistan that the politicians' corruption was so much that now the militia and the forces are not bothered. The security forces, the army is not bothered to sacrifice their lives for them. So President Ghani, even though he was honest with his country, he did not realize this fact that the army was not happy, that the army was not together and united, and that militias were there only to gain financial or humanitarian profits. Nothing else was happening. I mean, when we look at Herat, what happened in Herat yesterday, that's the bordering town with Iran in the south. Herat has a very famous Mujahideen commander, a very old person, 72 years old, Ismail Khan. And a couple of weeks earlier, he was raising his weapons, an old guy, carrying an AK-47, ready to fight the Taliban with his militia. He surrendered last night when the Taliban entered the city, and look how the Taliban treated him. Instead of, humiliating him or killing him or torturing him, they went there and they greeted him as if they are seeing their elders. The Taliban taking photographs with them. This has made an impact. Other people across the country, other militia leaders or former commanders, they just see the good behavior of the Taliban and they also stop fighting.
On this though, and as you said earlier, the Taliban is not a monolith, right? It does seem as if there's different command centers and commanders that do have a reasonable amount of autonomy on the ground. And we are seeing, and you probably from closer can comment on this. So in many areas there is this freedoms that are being exercised, right? We do see the Taliban behaving very differently from previously or from reported previously, but we are seeing differences. But in some areas there are reports that that schools are being closed, that soldiers are being executed. How true is this, and how emblematic is this of Taliban policy, or is it commanders on the ground policy?
Well, brother, I'll be very honest with you. I have spoken to several commanders on ground. In fact, I have spoken to one of the governors, in area, the Taliban governor in an area where everybody accused them of killing, people in hundreds. The Taliban, they say that in just 4 persons were killed by the Taliban fighters. These were, out of the 27,000 soldiers that surrendered, the Taliban had killed 4 soldiers that were unarmed. And the culprits, they say, these were the Taliban fighters, were arrested, and they would be put to proper justice system, and they would be punished. That's what I was told. Otherwise, many of the reports that we have heard of the Taliban atrocities, they cannot be verified. In fact, there were some videos claimed to be or propagated as the Taliban atrocities against the surrendering soldiers, and it turned out that these were the propaganda videos that the Afghan government had initially planned or staged. The Taliban do believe, or they do agree that they have committed some mistakes, including that killing of a comedian in Kandahar. But then again, they arrested the people who did that. But then again, they also had as proofs the videos where he would abuse the Taliban elders, calling them by bad names and all the thing while sitting with the Afghan army. Still, that do not justify killing an innocent comedian. So the Taliban this time are very clever, I would say. They have a system where they don't even bother, even if it's a senior commander or whoever it is. But if they believe that someone is going out of the committees or the commissions, the military commissions guidelines in fighting, they do punish them. I believe they have changed a lot, but still there are always chances of similar or such incidents where a rogue mujahideen or Taliban fighter would commit suicides that can be labeled as war crimes, or that can be against humanity.
Okay. Before we going into the roots and before moving on to the next section, we're looking at the responses. What's your comment on? You see, the US has now issued a statement that it's going to deploy another 3,000 troops. The Brits are going to deploy 600 troops, ostensibly to evacuate their citizens. Is it actually not? I mean, this seems a lot for just evacuations. Are they trying to now reassert or re-enter the country? What's your thoughts on that?
I believe that the US would not come back to Afghanistan on ground and start fighting again. And yes, it looks like they are trying to pull out or evacuate their personnel on ground. That is the humanitarians, the diplomatic missions, and everything else. We have been told that there are about 2,500 American nationals on ground who are working in different NGOs and humanitarian organizations and the embassy. So I think the US would probably try to provide them security, despite the fact that the Taliban would not harm them, as they always or repeatedly say that they would not go against the Doha agreement. So I doubt that the Americans would again come to fight. They would not do so. They would not do it. They realize that it's like starting again the war.
Do you then think that the numbers are basically just inflated to try and actually create some fear on the ground? Because, as you said, if there's 2,500 Americans, you're not going to need one troop for one individual. So is it just, in a sense, inflated numbers, and in a sense, war propaganda that they're going to dispatch these 3,000 troops?
I believe they would send more people. They would send it because they would try to make sure they would want to safeguard their people, and it's not just landing on Kabul airport and sending people to get to fetch the people from the embassies. I believe they would also try to go to other places other than Kabul and try to evacuate their people from there as well. So the exaggerated number might be true.
Ah, um, on international responses, what do you make of the Chinese, the Iranian, and the Russian responses? We're seeing negotiations. We're seeing, or at least from our side, we're seeing negotiations. We're seeing, the Taliban also vow that it won't actually attack any of these countries.
Well, it's kind of strange that everybody else was busy in blaming the Taliban and shaming the Taliban and tried to fight the Taliban during the Doha peace process and even after that. And that is the time when the Chinese played smart and the Iranians followed suit, and so did the Russians. They started establishing contacts with the Taliban. In fact, cementing their contacts with the Taliban. The Taliban, if they believe any other country, if they believe any superpower or anyone, it is the Chinese. If they trust someone, that's the Chinese, because the Chinese have showed their sincerity in holding the peace process or peace talks, and also lengthy discussions or the future of Afghanistan, the Chinese investment that they want to do it. So I believe they are able to convince the Taliban that the future would be guaranteed. It would be a safe future, that the Chinese would not be against the Taliban. They haven't officially said that they would accept the Taliban government. There were speculations in government in media yesterday, but that has not been verified. But they have convinced the Taliban. They have gained trust among the Taliban leadership, and that is going to help them in future. And this also goes for Russia and Iran.
This is a good segue to the next part of the discussion on the roots of the conflict. Now, I mean, before going to the roots itself, can you comment on the Intra-Afghan Dialogues? The US pulled out supposedly, ostensibly thinking that the situation was going to calm down, that there was going to be a political solution, that the government was going to be able to consolidate control. And all of this, I mean, seemingly hasn't happened. So, why has these Afghan dialogues that have been going on in Qatar failed so badly, or at least not have had any results as the US intended?
Yeah, there are many reasons that we can talk about. One of them is lack of trust or sincerity, lack of on the both the sides. I would say decision making power was not there, or there was deficit that people did not want. Some people on the front face would want peace process, but behind the scenes they were not serious enough to have these peace talks. If we talk about the US, we can we can go back to a situation where Dr. Zalmay Khalilzad, after all his efforts, was able to convince the Taliban and others to sit and talk about peace agreement, and they had made quite a good progress when former President Donald Trump suddenly was not happy with the progress and everything was stopped. But even then, Dr. Zalmay Khalilzad was able to convince everybody who was against the peace process, and we saw where he took it. They agreed on a peace agreement, although the Taliban would happily say that almost everything they had said from the start was accepted. But still, it was a peace agreement. It allowed the US a safe exit, and they were able to go out of Afghanistan. I understand, and we have heard this from different people, that one of the points of the Doha agreements, one of the important points was that was on demand of the Kabul government, that intra-Afghan talks should initiate as soon as possible. The Taliban were reluctant during the Doha process, and they did not want to have any peace process or peace talks with the Afghan government because they did not accept the government. But when the agreement was signed on the 29th of February 2020, there was a clause or a point there that was agreed upon, that 10 days from that date, that was the 10th of March, and I'm saying this information, sharing this information from the very close contact, that was an associate of Dr. Zalmay Khalilzad, who had witnessed all these things. He believes, or he says, that it was agreed that the Taliban and the government representatives or elders or politicians from Afghanistan, they would meet on the 10th of March 2020, and they would start talking about Islamic system in Afghanistan that is accepted to all, which necessarily did not mean that the Taliban would come into power immediately or that Sheikh Hebatullah would be the head of the state. They were trying to find out a peaceful solution to the process, or the issue, the conflict. What happened back then, according to many sources, according to many people, when this information was taken from Doha to Kabul by Dr. Khalilzad, and when it was presented to Dr. Ashraf Ghani, it is said that Dr. Ghani had allegedly told him that, not now, after my 4 years term finishes, then we can talk about the peace process. And unfortunately, this this agreement or this point was maligned in the media. It was, there was an anti-peace or intra-Afghan talks propaganda by the Afghan politicians. Some of them are still on record there, like we can talk about Dr. Hanif Atmar, and also the first vice president. They labeled it as the same agreement that had happened with the Mujahideen back in the 90s that toppled the Najibullah's government, and they say we do not accept such an agreement. So it was a delaying tactic, and the Taliban clearly could see this. That really made them unhappy, that the Kabul government was trying to hinder or to delay the peace process. And we saw it, instead of 10th March of 2020, the peace talks began 4 months later. So it was still not very late, but after that, the issues started to emerge slowly. And first major issue was that the Taliban would always say the people who represented them in Doha, they had the authority to talk and take decisions, and to take decisions on many things. And for the serious most things, they only had to go back to the Shura and get their approval. Otherwise, they were in a position. There are people like Mullah Brother Akhund, Sheikh Abdul Hakim, and Sher Muhammad Abbas Tanikzai, among others. They were, such high-ranking Taliban officials that their word was taken as final word, and that they had the authority from their supreme commander Sheikh Hebatullah and the 23-member Shura. They say that the Taliban were serious, they were sincere, they had the capability to implement whatever decision was taken, but the government representatives were toothless. That's what the Taliban would say. They would send people who had to go back to Kabul on every single point, that they were there. They were not even able to discuss things in details, that even a single little issue would be dragged on for weeks, and that no one was sincere in there. And the Taliban say that whenever anything important was discussed, they would reach an agreement. The government side would request for a timeout, and they would go back to Ashraf Ghani in Kabul, and a few days later they would disappear or disagree with the points that were discussed. So the Taliban say that we gave them about 15 months after February 2020 till the withdrawal of the US forces to come to the negotiation table and talk. And the Taliban alleged that the Afghan government was not sincere. Instead of getting serious in peace talks, they started making us furious by openly saying that they could finish the Taliban in 6 months or in 4 months, and then statements from the deputy vice president like, even if there's no one left, I'll be the only one fighting Taliban. So they said that they were not sincere in peace process, and they just wanted to fight, or in fact rule the country. That is why the Taliban say that now we are able to continue what we wanted to do and what we are doing best.
Okay, so in your opinion, because the talks amongst many outside officials is that the Taliban delegation in Qatar doesn't have enough influence over on the ground events. But as you seem to point out that they do, that it's not as it's more monolithic than many think. I mean, does the group have that coherence, or is it the situations previously where it was very difficult to have that coherence within the Taliban itself?
Brother, there can be delays on implementing anything, or let's suppose there is any mishap on ground and the Doha office is involved in sorting that out. There are possible delays because of lack of communication, because the communication channels that they use are sometimes time taking. The thing that we should know, that everybody should know, is that the Taliban do not have a personality. It's not like a personality rules above everybody. They have a system that is governed by the shura. The shura is above everyone and everything. So saying this, that the Doha office has no command or control over the military people, is not entirely correct. Yes, there could be issues that the Doha office takes time to convince, and it's not like directly convincing, let's say, a commander in Kandahar or in Herat or somewhere else. No, it's not like that. The Taliban have commissions. They have about 24 or so commissions for everything. They have a military commission that has a top head, Mullah Muhammad Yaqub. That's the son of Mullah Muhammad Umar. He was also the deputy head of the movement. And this military commission then has two further commanders or heads who are responsible for the whole country, that is the north and the south. These two figures, Sadruddin Ibrahim and then Abdul Qayyum Zakir, are responsible for their commanders in all the provinces. The provincial commanders are then they have authority over the commanders in districts, and the district commanders then have authority over the village commanders, and the commanders then go down to the lowest level of a single fighter. So to implement a command over a fighter, it's like a chain of command that goes from the shura to the commander, to the deputy commanders, to the provincial commanders, district commanders, stuff like that. Now, if someone says that the Taliban commanders on ground don't listen to the Qatar office, it's not like that. The Qatar office, if they have any issues with the on-ground commanders, they will not go to the commanders directly. They will go to the shura. They will tell the shura that we have such and such issue, or there's this issue needs to be resolved. It's the shura then that issues commands to the military commission people, and those people then implement it. So that is one reality there. Second thing is, the Americans had rightly sensed this thing, that the Doha office is not an entire command that can be influential on the commanders on ground. And that is why back in 2018, I believe, they asked Pakistan to release Mullah Baradar Akhund, who was in Pakistani prison. He was in captivity, because the Americans knew that Mullah Baradar has the respect, the authority, and being the second senior most person after Mullah Muhammad Umar, has that command and that charisma that he can influence.
Hello? It's dead.
Peace process that was implemented on ground. We have seen it on many occasions. Like if I were to tell you, one agreement in Doha, there should be a ceasefire for Eid, and the Taliban obeyed it on ground. There was not a single bullet fired by the Taliban on 3-4 occasions. So they have that authority to go to the shura, and then the shura implements the commands through the military commission.
Okay. Okay, let's move to the other side, right? The government side.
Yeah.
The speed of the Taliban territorial control has been immense. And I want you to comment on one what does the divisions within the government have to do with this? How does it influence us? I mean, we're looking for the past two elections, whether rigged or not rigged. There's been, there's been two people claiming victory. So what does that have, and why has there been no government or territorial control or consolidation, even though the Americans have been in for now 20 years? That's longer than World War I, longer than World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam combined. So how, they had so much external support for 20 years. Why have they failed?
Yes, one thing was, how sincere was everybody with the state, with the country? Were they really, in for the progress and development and reconstruction of Afghanistan, or were they trying to have better relations with the donors who were providing millions and millions of dollars? Everybody played their role in getting stronger, in having better contacts with the Americans and other nations, and no one bothered to improve the situation of the country. That was one issue. Secondly, Afghanistan has about 45% population of Pashtuns, which is not always enough to give them a Pashtun president. So it's obvious that there will be alliances, and we have seen it while President Karzai was there. He had a good authority. He had this charisma of influencing non-Pashtuns, and he was able to gain more popularity compared to President Ghani. Although President Ghani, was a more suitable candidate, I would say, than President Karzai, because of his understanding of international politics and because of his initial sincerity towards Afghanistan. The issue was that every politician that came to power, he or she, they just tried to gain as much as possible from the international donations instead of spending it on Afghanistan. They established their estates in the Middle Eastern countries, in Turkey, in other places, and they left the country as it was. So this resulted in a issue, in a mistrust among many politicians who are not benefiting from this, who did not had the trick of earning this American loyalty and earning dollars. These people started to form or go against the current government, or would support anyone who would say things that pleased them or at least attracted them. Look at Dr. Abdullah. He was a clear in contention in the for the presidentship. Although he lost, he claimed that he had won. They started fighting over it, and this benefited the Taliban, who would then propagate that, listen, if these guys cannot get together to provide this country with food and security and everything else, and they are fighting for their rule, how can they be sincere to Afghanistan? That is why the Sharia that we want to impose is better for you. Many people in the rural areas bought this trick, this propaganda, and they accepted it. So I believe that the lack of sincerity, the urge or the greed to earn more money, to get more connections with America or other countries, that is one of the major factors. Secondly, it's known, and unfortunately, everybody who knows Afghan issues, they believe or they say that most of these politicians, if you ask President Ghani, he has an American nationality. If you ask the vice president, he would be probably a Canadian. They have in the past, they had asylum in different Western countries, and people believe that their loyalties lies within those countries. They are not sincere to Afghanistan. So for them, it's 5 years or 4 years in government, and then taking a flight and going back to the country where they have nationality for now.
Okay, before we start wrapping up, one more question on these routes, and maybe it's a question I should have asked earlier, but maybe our listeners would be very interested. And specifically because we're talking about Pashtuns, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazaras, what actually is the composition of Afghanistan, and how does that composition actually lead to the situation being as it is?
Well, historically, Afghanistan has been ruled by Pashtuns. And it's because it's not a clear majority, but 44% gives them, 44% of the country, where other three minorities form the rest of 54%. Um, the Pashtuns have remained dominant. Even if you go back to the history, the Ghoris and other people, they were able to rule the country, but in fact, the Pashtuns who were united in the kingdoms after that, since the founder Ahmad Shah Abdali's time, everybody that ruled was Pashtun. They were able to take along with them the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, although there would be enmities and issues. But recently, after the withdrawal of after the Najib's government ended and Mujahideen came to power, majority was Pashtuns as well. The Taliban were all Pashtuns back in their time. Once they were toppled from the government in 2001. The biggest blunder that happened was the Pashtuns were entirely taken out of the power. Although President Ghani was in power, President Hamid Karzai was a Pashtun. He was the president, but he was surrounded by the minority people, and the Americans empowered the non-Pashtuns, the minority Hazaras, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, which were back then the Northern Alliance, as we remember them. This did not serve well. One, because all the Pashtun areas in the south were left. I would say they were not given any due consideration or importance. They were left behind in education and in health facilities and everything else. They were not constructed or developed, and that gave momentum to the Taliban movement. If we remember 2001, 2, 3, 4, those were the years when the Taliban were completely silent. They were not even able to restructure or resurface. But once the injustices with the Pashtun areas started to show up, that's when the Taliban regrouped and gained momentum and got importance among the people. So historically, the Pashtuns have ruled Afghanistan because they are in majority in the sense that they are almost half of the country.
Okay, no, that's very, very informative, enlightening. In future, maybe we should look more at the history and the fact that how the Afghans were able to balance between the Soviets and the US, how they resisted colonialism, those issues which definitely also influence the current conflict. But wrapping up, what do you see as the future, as the short term and the medium term future now that the Taliban have basically gained? I mean, it's only a matter of time before they consolidate control over virtually everything. I mean, maybe Kabul will resist for a while, but what do you see as the future, and how do you see it being shaped by external powers?
Well, I'll be very honest with you on this. Till late June, I had high hopes that everybody on board would realize that Afghanistan needs sincere peace process. That fighting is not the solution. That the Taliban could be convinced to power sharing. That a system would be implemented where everybody could coexist and Afghanistan could thrive for future and with peace. Unfortunately, all the chances were lost. We still have a bleak chance where Afghanistan elders and external negotiators could come and sit and try to convince the Taliban, although it would be very hard now because they have taken 18 provinces, two are about to fall. That makes 18 out of 34 is more than 50% of the provinces, and the Taliban are now in control over 75% of the country. So I believe unfortunately the chances have been lost, but now we have to focus. If the Taliban comes into power, how can the peace, the security, the safety, and the prosperity of Afghan people be guaranteed? My understanding while working with the Taliban for the past 12 years is that they have changed a lot. The hardliner thing that was tagged or labeled against them has diminished to great extent. They have many young people who are well educated, who know and can differentiate between the need of the hour and between strict stricter rules. The Taliban also believe that there are some things where they can be lenient as Islam allows. Others, there have to be strictness. So they have learned a lot. Like we have seen, the use of mobile phones and cameras and videos was not permissible in the past, and now they're happily taking photos and videos. On girls' education, they have been proudly saying, the Taliban, that even in the past 20 years fighting in Helmand, in Helmand, girls' education thrived in Taliban-controlled areas, and many would witness and confess to that yes, the Taliban did that. Although they say that segregated education is important, no co-education. They have their own interpretation for that. I believe the world should realize that if Taliban come into power, they should work with them. They should try to, take things with peace, with negotiation, with dialogues, as it is easy to convince an Afghan through talking, but you cannot force him to commit anything that he does not want to, unless you try talking it out.
Jazakallah so much for your time, and I certainly learned a lot. I hope our listeners as well. I think we went a lot more deeper than the norm, and we'll definitely be speaking to you in future. It was just a very, very refreshing and insightful conversation.
Thank you, Brother Ebrahim Deen.
Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for being with us.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for having me.